Hubbard, co-editor of TransKin, a guide for family and friends of transgendered people. And I have with me today Carol Grever, who's the author of My Husband is Gay, and one of the, what's the right word, advisors to the Straight Spouse Network. So welcome, Carol.
Hi. Hi. Good to be here.
So what did you feel when you first found out that your husband was gay?
Total surprise. Total surprise. He told me after we had been married for more than 30 years, and it was the last thing that I expected to hear.
And then what did you feel after that?
After the shock?
Yes.
I think compassion for him in a way. He was so distraught when he told me. My first reaction was to feel sorry for him, and because it really hadn't soaked in. It really hadn't sunk in what the implication was of what he had just told me. But when I realized that everything would change, then my main feeling was sadness, grief, really grief, like someone had died.
And what was the grief about? Yes, your husband was still alive, but what were you grieving?
I was grieving the loss of our life together. It was pretty clear to me almost from the beginning that we would eventually separate. We didn't right away, and in fact, because of other factors, a business that we both owned and had to extricate ourselves from, we stayed together for about 4 years, but we were essentially separated even during that time. And it was a very difficult time. It was lonely. I ranged between rage and anger and just sorrow, deep grief, so many emotions. It's a mixture of all of it.
And were you grieving the loss of what you thought your life was going to be about?
Absolutely. Yeah. We had done a good deal of travel. We had done sports together, things like that. And really all of our social life was tied to each other. And so all of that changed, or was in the process of changing, even when we were together. And it just got more and more difficult. When we finally did actually separate, we sold our business. And when we finally did separate, we were pretty much living as single people.
And I know you wrote a book after having interviewed a lot of people whose spouses had come out as gay after they were married for a while, even a long while. And did you find that your experience was similar or different? And if so, how?
I think my stages of recovery were very similar to those I saw in other people. And that's what gave me the idea for the book. I found it was pretty easy to find other straight spouses. And I interviewed 35 women for this book. And every time I would say to some friend, I'm writing a book, they'd say, what's it about? And I would tell them, and they'd say, I know somebody who has had that experience. So I got almost all of the subjects for my interviews from referrals like that.
I remember hearing you say that another thing you experienced was feeling stupid. Why so?
Oh, yeah. That's a very common feeling, too. If someone is living a lie and they're very good at covering up who they really are, you really can't tell. And when my husband told me that he is gay, at first I couldn't believe it. I was in denial for a while. But the next thing I was feeling was, how could I not know? We had been married for decades, and we had 2 children we'd raised together. We worked together. How could I not know? But he was very, very good at covering his tracks.
So in the book that I co-edited, we talked to significant others, we talked to family members, we talked to friends and allies about what their experience is when their transgender person came out to them.
Yeah.
Do you think these are similar emotions that these family members might also experience?
I think so. I think shock or very great surprise that a person has harbored this self-identity for such a long time and had kept the person could keep it secret for so long. So there is great surprise or shock. There is the same kind of sense of loss, because the person you thought you knew is not the person that is really there, or that will be there. So I think all of the other stages of anger and grief and well, it's like the stages of recovery after a death. And I think that we all have some experience of those stages. Mm-hmm.
And I know you've answered this a little bit, but maybe we could delve it into a little more. For a person who's never thought about anything like this or had this experience, making the analogy to a death in the family seems a little extreme. Could you just talk a little more about that?
Well, I think it is similar with straight spouses and with SOFFAs, as you call them, the significant others and family of transgender people, because there is a loss of the person you thought you knew, and there's a grieving process that goes with that.
And one thing I've noticed for myself anyway, that when a person dies, there's certainly a lot of grief when you love that person dearly, but there's also a sense of finality, which doesn't happen if the person doesn't actually die.
That's true. That's true. And in a way, that's a blessing, because you can learn to know and like and love that same person, even in the different guise, even in the different life that they create.
So we learned in listening to all these stories from SOFFAs that the impact is a ripple effect. That there's an impact on the significant other, certainly, and to a large degree, but also on parents and friends of the family and communities and churches and other social institutions. How do you see that ripple effect happening when a gay person comes out?
I think the social network changes entirely in both cases, both with SOFFAs and also with straight spouses. But I know that to be a fact for straight spouses, because there were very few couple friends that we had when we were a couple who remained close friends, a few, but not many. So we started over. What I call it in my book is reconfiguring your life. You haven't lost your life. It isn't as if you can't go on, but you have to reconfigure the way you do things. I had to learn, after all those years of being married, I had to learn how to be single, how to cope, how to take care of all of the broken things that happen in a house and on a car and so on, that I'd never done before. So I think there's, you just have to sort of start over.
And can you identify what you think is one of the first steps to reconfiguring your life after learning something this dramatically different in your life?
Yes. I think I began to learn new skills. I had been so busy in office work, in doing our business and in doing marketing and wearing high heels and suits every day and so on, that I hadn't had time really to explore the outdoors. And so one thing that I did, just as an example, was I took up canoeing, whitewater canoeing, and I spent a dozen years going on many trips every summer. I did a lot of hiking in the mountains. So those were the kinds of things that changed for me, and I learned to love the outdoor life.
And
That's an example.
I can imagine that for many people, the impulse is to change everything, or
Mhm.
the impulse is to hide away and not let anyone know what you're feeling. What do you think about those two options?
I think it's imperative to extend yourself, to go out, to find something that interests you, and to recreate yourself in a way, find new friends and so on. And you can do that by finding activities that you really enjoy. Um, I I also had a cat that I just loved very much, and I think having a pet is very, very useful as well if you're learning to be someone different from what you were before.
And maybe some other kinds of service activities.
Absolutely, yes, volunteer work.
Yeah.
I retired from the business, of course, after we sold it, and fortunately, I was able to spend time doing a lot of volunteer work. I was chair of the board of trustees of a university, and I was chair of the Boulder Chamber, and so on. I did a lot of civic work like that, but also volunteering with the Y, and my love of athletic things, sports and so on, led me there. And I've been teaching senior fitness now for a number of years at the YMCA.
And I would imagine, I'm guessing, that it's probably very good advice not to jump into anything too quickly, to give yourself some time to go through a transition process. So I'd like to talk a little bit about transitioning. This
Okay.
is a word we use in the transgender community, that a person is transitioning from one gender to another. But I've also noticed, as I've talked to many SOFFAs, that they also experience for a long time a sense of transitioning themselves. Have you noticed that as you've talked to people whose spouses are gay?
Yes, I think so. I think it may be more dramatic for the spouses of a person who is transgender, because in that case, there is such a dramatic change in the other person generally, in the former spouse or the spouse that you stay with. There's I think it's true of both, actually. Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that one difference might be that a transgender person, once they start transitioning, it becomes pretty obvious visually. So you see the person, you say, oh, something's quite different. But that is probably not true for the spouse and family of a gay person.
To a certain extent, it is. Not as much. It's not nearly as dramatic. But most of the straight spouses that I have worked with have noted that once they were separated from the gay person, that that person changed dramatically in his or her appearance. Particularly, I saw it in specifically, I saw it in my own husband, because he dressed differently. He came out in lots of different ways. Very, very flashy cars and clothes, and he dyed his beard and his hair, and tried to look younger and dressed like a younger person, found younger friends and so on. So I think that was part of his transition. He was experimenting with what he could do and what felt right for him.
And I presume becoming more his own authentic self.
Yes. I really believe that. I'm not sure he knew how to express that.
Sure.
I didn't know how to express my new self either. So it takes a time of adjustment. And all this time, at least the straight spouse is going through this roller coaster of emotions. One day you get up and you're feeling pretty good and things look bright, and the next day you're down in the dumps again. And so it is this up and down that is crazy making.
And I've noticed that a lot of what you're talking about is very true for the transgendered person too. They experiment with their voice, they experiment with their clothing, they experiment with makeup and accessories, they experiment with walking, and maybe more dramatic than for the gay person. But I think that my guess is that then the person who's trying to relate to them in a very, even if it's in a very loving way, don't quite know who they're going to see the next time they see them.
That's right. That's right. It's quite in my case, it was quite a difference from the suit and tie every single day to the Hawaiian shirts. And I haven't seen my former husband in anything but a really loud Hawaiian shirt since. And we are still in touch, very much so.
So yeah, that transitions me for what I'd like to talk about next is getting stuck. And I imagine that's not uncommon as you're trying to work through these various stages that for some people, what happens is they kind of get stalled in the process or don't know what to do next, or just stay in an angry, bitter, hateful stage. What would you say about that?
I think counseling is an extremely good decision if that's possible. Peer groups are extremely helpful. I'm working right now with a group of Australian women, and it's all online, of course, but they are tremendously helpful to each other, very, very cohesive group. It's like the Straight Spouse Network. It is a part of the Straight Spouse Network, but they are far flung. They live in all parts of that huge country, and yet they're very close friends and communicate almost daily. That kind of peer support, whether it's online or in person, is very important. The PFLAG is good for even straight spouses as well, although that's not its primary focus. But I think peer counseling, actual counseling or therapy, if that's necessary, if the problems go deep. But we need help to get through this. Some people go to the minister of a church, etc. A good friend is also really helpful.
And I imagine that there are some people don't want to get unstuck, but let's assume that you do want to be unstuck, and then, but just feel like this is going to be how you feel forever.
Yeah, that's a very dangerous place, because the most dangerous part of the stages of recovery is the anger stage, or the rage. And if that hangs around too long, then it turns into depression and self-hatred and so on. And it can, I mean, suicide is not that uncommon. Drug addiction, alcoholism, so on. These are ways of escape from that. And it is a dangerous place. I happen to feel that the only way to recovery is to learn to value the other person who has hurt you, to get past that rage and anger and feeling of animosity. And once you reach the point where you see, you accept what happened as just part of life, and when you can see the other person as doing what he or she felt was absolutely necessary to survival, then you can begin to forgive. And once that happens, if you can actually get to the point of forgiveness, then you're really healed.
I've also talked to a lot of spouses and family members, particularly who feel guilty that they're having what they would identify as negative emotions. Here their loved one is feeling more authentic, feeling happier than maybe they have the rest of their lives. And yet the SOFFAs are saying, yeah, but I don't get it. I'm still feeling sad. I'm still what would you say to that?
Well, they still have that loss. They have lost something that they valued greatly. And learning to accept what replaced that loss is probably very difficult. I have not experienced this directly, at least not at this point in my life, but I think acceptance is the word.
Now I'd like to talk a little bit about gender identity and sexual orientation. And of course, we make the distinction that they're not really the same thing, but of course, clearly entwined. and dependent upon each other, and that a gay person is working to understand themselves and their sexual orientation, whereas a transgendered person is also working, may be working on their sexual orientation, certainly, but also working on their gender identity. So what do you see, how would you describe the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation? And how do you think that makes a difference for the gay spouse of a gay?
I'm not an expert on this, but I think it's pretty clear that both of these conditions are inborn. The sexual orientation is inborn, and the sense that a person is inhabiting the wrong body is also inborn, because children start to feel uncomfortable in their own bodies. Even young children can. And this is a growing awareness that something just isn't right. And when a gay person marries and is trying to be something that they are not, everybody loses, really. And the pressure for a gay person to marry in our society is lessening, but some of the factors that force that are still in play. For example, strong family values that insist that a person marry someone of the opposite sex. And religious beliefs, and just social standing, career considerations, and so on. And these factors would apply just as much to a person who would like to transition to the gender identity that they feel is correct for them, but they would feel unable to do it. So there's a lot of pressure. I don't really see how they can avoid doing something, and yet it's a lose-lose situation in a way.
Yeah, and often spouses and family members and friends feel like once the transgender person is starting to succeed in their transition, that they're the ones that are experiencing the loss. I would assume that'd be similar to spouses of gay people.
I think so. Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about more about how family and friends and particularly other community people are affected by and can be more proactive in working toward a society where we have less disruption, where gay people do not marry, are able to marry a person that they love of the same sex,
Yes.
and that transgendered people are able to live successfully and well without, a lot of commendation, if not outright violence directed toward them. Mm-hmm. So what do you think, maybe I guess what I'm asking about is what should we be doing? Where we've become more aware of this whole, we've worked through, if we're a member, if we're a family member or a friend or an ally, we've worked through our issues, then what?
What do you do after you've worked through your own issues?
Right.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
Well, I think activism is a good answer. I think writing books, writing articles, if that is your bent, is helpful. I think working toward a kinder and gentler and more just society is a worthy life cause. I applaud the movement in our country and the laws that have changed so that same-sex marriage is legal. I would like to see it happen in other countries of the world as well. And in fact, in Australia, as I mentioned, I'm working with a group there, and in Australia, they are asking the same questions that we asked 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and they're moving in the same direction, and they will soon have a vote on this issue as well. So I think that's interesting, and I think that we are moving toward a broader understanding of what marriage really means. But what can we do? Look for whatever is available in your own in your own circle, in your own place.
And groups where you can fit in and do what you would like to be working on.
Yes.
So this question may be fraught with danger, so feel free not to answer if you choose to, but what do you think religious institutions should be doing around these issues of working with family and friends of gay people and of transgendered people, as well as, how they might be working toward a more equitable society? What do you think our religious institutions should be doing?
I think they should be moving toward this kind of acceptance. And I see that happening even in the Catholic Church, and with Pope Francis' stand and his wider, broader mind about this very issue. There is still a great deal of prejudice against same-sex marriage and related issues in a lot of our churches. And I think that people need to act with kindness and with understanding about the pain that these restrictions cause others.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. So maybe to kind of wind things down a little bit, what lessons have you learned? You've been doing this for a while now. What is it, about 10 years?
More like 20.
Oh, well, there you go. So what lessons have you learned that you would want to share about this journey that you've been on?
I think everything is path. Things happen to us that that are unexpected, and that we feel are terrible. They're the worst thing that could possibly happen. The bottom drops out. The world turns upside down, and we think that we can't survive it. I think that every one of these events is a teacher, and that we can learn what we need to know. I have absolutely no regrets for all the things that have come to me in this way, even when they were very, very painful, like when my husband came out and my world turned upside down. I thought I'd never be happy again. And I am happier now than I have ever been, because I have worthwhile work. I have a wonderful home and a husband who loves me, and it is a wonderful life. But I had to get past that awful feeling of being lost. I never was really lost. I was found.
Mm. And maybe just to speak briefly about children, and as we get more enlightened in our society, I think both gay people and transgendered people won't feel as obligated to get married in a way that produces a lot of pain for the children in the family. But could you talk a little bit about, as adult children of gay spouses and gay people, and I assume it would make some similar analogies between children of transgendered people?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
That's a very convoluted question. Let me try again.
How the children feel?
Yeah, the adult children of transgendered people, the adult children of gay people, what issues do they struggle with, and where might they go for help?
Right. There are organizations that offer help specifically to these populations. Collage is one of those, and the website of PFLAG has a whole list of related organizations that address various age groups and so on. I think that is one avenue, but to understand that the person who has come out, or the person who has transitioned, is still inside the same person that you loved before and that you knew before. And the outer appearance may have changed, and the family may have been disrupted. Nevertheless, this is a person who loved you and whom you loved, and you can still do that. You can still love. So once again, the word acceptance comes up. Accept what is, and learn to adjust to the new circumstance, and you may find that it's much better for everyone. That is certainly the case in my family.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place to end, unless you have just other thoughts that you'd like to share before we end our conversation.
I've enjoyed our talk, and I really think that there is a great deal of similarity in the family issues that come up from both transgender and gay families. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Carol, for spending this time with us. And again, your book is My Husband is Gay. I know you've written several other books as well. Would you like to mention those?
When Your Spouse Comes Out is a long-term recovery book that I co-authored with a psychologist, talking about long-term issues like depression and other long-term effects. And I have a poetry book out as well called Glimpses. That's the fun one.
Well, thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you.